Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending on your time zone. We are now moving into the last session of Flash Talks. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Professor Diana Ferro, a PhD senior research and data scientist at Ospedale Pediatrico Bambino Gesù and part of the executive board of the Italian Society for AI in Medicine. The title of her presentation is Prioritizing Healthcare AI-Driven Innovations, Key Insights and Strategic Interventions Focusing on Ethical Challenges. Professor Ferro, please take the stage.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to speak about artificial intelligence because it's what I do for a living. And specifically, I'm going to try to simplify as much as I can. So AI in healthcare does principally two things. First, it predicts who is at risk, and then it tells you why. So basically, whatever AI you use, whether it's machine learning, deep learning, neural network, generative AI, it will tell you who is the patient that has a need and why does have that need. So what it means? It means that in healthcare, we cannot just predict the future, but we can assign patient-specific therapeutics. So that is why we say that is the best tool that we have right now to do precision medicine on top of biologics. However, in healthcare, we do something even more than that. We keep people safe. So my team at Children's Mercy have one directive. Keep children out of the hospital and keep them safe in the middle of a pandemic, meaning to use whatever you have on hand, all the data that you can have to keep those children safe, asleep in their beds. So what we did, we'd come up with an idea that is illustrated here. Is a framework in which you select an outcome together with a physician. So let's say we want to predict comorbidities or predict hospitalization for DKA, that is a condition in diabetes type 1. Decide how to intervene after that prediction. For example, if the child didn't have good nutrition, how we can intervene in nutrition. If the children have a bad glycemia, how we can help the children to get better style in their everyday living to control glycemia. Implement the strategy in clinics. So what I'm presenting now is not research only, is clinical work, okay? And then when we find something that works, disseminate to the entire community, because every child should be safe independent of the country. So this is the system, very simple. So we take all the data we had, meaning personal records, watches, pumps, sensors, patient-reported outcome, medical record, imaging, everything we had, we put it in what's called a data lake, together with a company, industry partners, develop models, and then act on those predictions. So now, usually, my talk here, we proceed by sharing you how fun was to predict outcome, how good we were to keep the children outside. But what I'm going to do to tell you instead is that we have too many interventions. Basically, we had a system in which the patients, the provider, the nurses, the CEO of the hospital could come up and say, I want to do this kind of interventions. The AI will tell you which intervention target what, drug, treatment, therapeutics, behavior, movement, exercise, nutrition, whatever you say, and then we try to prioritize that. And it was very difficult because those interventions have different costs. Different children have different insurances. And so govern the AI, what I was deciding was very hard. So we have a duty to be able to approach every children with the same quality standard of healthcare using AI trustfully and safely while maintaining something that was sustainable over time in the hospital. Then in pediatrics, it's not so simple. So we create what is called the umbrella protocol. Basically, it's an ethical protocol that governs two aspects: the AI models, so the health data science, and the AI-driven intervention at point of care, so the clinical practice. And everything was based on evidence generation. So my team have a duty to keep the umbrella open. by generating evidence real time in what is called a learning healthcare system, having the data from the clinic feeding in the AI, and having the AI feeding data and decision tools to the providers in clinic real time. It's called real-time data listening. So, you know, in data science, we count things. So we say how many patients have a disease, how many patients have a condition, how many patients go through their interventions. Here we count provider level metrics, like how many providers are happy, what they think about their therapeutics, what intervention are best working, and so on. But there's a question that, you know, for me was very important. When do I close the umbrella? Because technically, as soon as I generate evidence, as soon as I, you know, demonstrate that my kids are safe, everything is fine. The umbrella stays open. But what is the threshold in which the umbrella gets closed? When you say, okay, no, this AI is wrong, I have to return it. This AI is not doing well, I have to stop it. The children is going worse. Why? Is the AI fault? Is the provider fault? Something went wrong? The sensor didn't work anymore? So there was so many questions. And so I decided to do something a bit strange. So I decided to join the ethical challenge of artificial intelligence in biomedicine. It's a group of work of 29 people. Was funded by NIH, FDA, and the White House. And so we were doing a work, this was before GPT, in which we decided how we create frameworks to make the AI safe in clinic, and how we come up with some idea regarding the future of the law, the ethics, and we want to do this without companies in the way that we can be like just scientists, providers, and care professionals. So first of all, we put together all the data. So everybody bring their own AI. You know, AI was started to be a thing. Everybody has tried AI before, even before GPTs. Then we say what are the questions, but come up a lot of bias, how we are sure that our AI is not biased. I will remember you, this is the United States, so data are very biased because you will have a lot of white male kids in the data set, so you know that AI will be very good and predict the outcome for those children, but everybody else will be left out because there will be outliers, right? So what's the challenge and what are the insights? So what we discovered first is that, well, we have our time communicating because the lawmaker were like, we don't understand what actually AI is specifically, and providers say, we really like the idea to use technology, but I don't trust it because I don't know what to believe is true. If I don't understand it, that's fear. And if I'm afraid, I'm not going to use it in clinic. That was the idea. So first of all, it was clear there was needed some kind of training programs or some kind of workshop to bridge this gap between who is very, very good on using AI and program the AI and use the data, and who was used to pen and paper to make prescription, for example. So we spent the first day just talking about definition of words, like what artificial mean, what intelligence mean, what's function mean, what trustfully high might means, and we didn't have a definition. And so when we finally align of some common terminology, meaning that, yeah, we need some kind of training here, we decided to go ahead and start working a little bit more in details. And we use this strategy called Wouldn't Be Great F. So we led the room in groups. We did a couple of rounds of knowledge cafe, and we come out with this would be it be great if. And these are these orange little post-it notes. You see, for example, how do we find out what patients want? Terminology barriers. Wouldn't it be great if we can talk together all the same language? And language here is America, so everybody was speaking English, but still we have our time to understand each other's. So at the end of the day, we come up with 78 Wikibis, okay? And what we did at Bambino Gesù, we processed the Wikibis with Gemini OpenAI, so we did some analytics on that, and we used another AI to make the infographic that you're gonna see. So the ethical challenge can be grouped in these 4 domains. Data issue, and these, of course, these are the technical people, the IT people on the team were like, you know, data is bad. Provider write data in a way that we cannot understand. There is a lot of little words that have a meaning in the ER, but doesn't have a meaning for a data scientist. So data quality, data dictionary, data grammar was an issue, and so we should do some work about it. So the AI and the LM application were not really clear, so providers were not sure what they can do with it. So let's say, so I have a computer. What do I do with a computer? Do I crash it on the bench until something happened with it? Like, they were not clear what they can do with it. Biology have a better clue because they did bioinformatics, so they know genetic genomics was a thing. So CRISPR was coming out, so they have a better idea what we can do with data. But still, in the clinical setting, in the real bedside setting, they were not really sure what to do with it. Patients were very excited. They thought that this was hope. You know, computer can do something that human cognition cannot do. That's hope. I can become immortal by giving my data to the cows. That's hope, that my story will teach something to someone else. So I can use my story to create innovation, to create cure, to create hope. And then there was model evaluation. So this is the geek in the room. They were like, okay, if I'm in hospital, I need to buy an AI. How do I know that I'm buying the right thing? How would we do with it? There is some kind of way to evaluate it. There is a quality metrics, how we do that. So you see there is a multi-stakeholder perspective on something that potentially can be really beneficial for society. So at the end of the day, everything was around the term of trust. Stakeholder wanted, CEO wanted to trust it, patient wanted to trust it, provider wanted to trust it, scientists want to trust it, that whatever they discover doesn't go to company and get sold out. That's also an issue of trust. So, and we say, how do we build trust in healthcare for AI? And how we do that in a way that we can actually implement at the point of care without risk. So come on that there is 4 areas in which trust can be built in AI. So AI literacy and workshop, we say, we need to talk the same language. We need at least understand each other to come to a conclusion. So multidisciplinarity is an amazing topic. I love it, but in university is not being taught still today. Patient-centered programs. So patients need to be part of the AI development. They need part of the co-design. The data belong to patients, so they should be understood and they should be part of the programming even. The evaluation process needs to be clear. So if I say positive predictive value is not a personal feeling, it's something that can be measured, and we know how much good need to be to take the model to the patient. And then the data infrastructure. Hospitals are not all at the same level. They're not all ready for technology. And it's not clear what is the minimum viable product for a hospital to be able to implement AI safely. Everybody can use AI in their phone now with GPT, but how we can do that safely is another matter. So what about Bambino Gesù then? So we are working on literacy workshop internationally and nationally by providing information and training opportunity for juniors and seniors that are interested to the topic. We are using what we know to build programs internationally. This is a pediatric moonshot about federated learning. I encourage everybody to see what we are working on that space to bring AI to bedside independent of the infrastructure so we can make it accessible to everybody, even in countries in which technology is a bit behind. We also work a lot in the model evaluation process. I mentioned to you type 1 diabetes. This is my former lab, so we still work a lot in that area. We are now publishing the models. We know that we are safe and we are able to share it. In oncology, we work a ton with patients with brain cancers, and this is Accelerate. And specifically now we're investing a lot of time in keeping data safe, so using AI to improve cybersecurity in remote patient monitoring. Finally, data infrastructure. We talk about grammar. It's important to have the data in the right grammar. It's vocabulary that I understand and my colleague in the US understand. So we are part of the European Data Network and the Odyssey American, European, and Italian community to be able to teach how to translate hospital data in a common grammar so we can move model, not data. And finally, the PNRR, that is actually the reason why I can be here today. So building diagnostic and technology at point of care in multiple diseases. So that is an example how one single hospital can make a difference in driving innovation and in AI in a safe and trustworthy way. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Ferro, for this terrific presentation. You rightly highlighted the importance of collaborative and interdisciplinary approach to regulating the application of artificial intelligence in biomedicine. Now there is time for a quick question or comment. No one. Nobody, there is one over there. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. But in your experience, your approach, how is possible this collaboration between the people involved in the informatics, engineering, and the clinician? So, because sometimes the language, the approach are very different. So, in which way to find really a cooperation about that?
Bring informaticians in the ward, in the hospital. Engineers might don't like that, but to be honest with you, the only way to understand medicine is see medicine be done and see that what are you doing on the data have an impact. When you are a data scientist, come from finance, for example, you will not understand that if there is an extra zero on your glucose, that means that the child is dead. But when they see the child in his eyes and understand if they make a mistake, that's going to be a problem. They will change entirely their approach and they start to listen. That's the way. And for the provider, take the provider to the AI. So meaning that we do this a lot with the Totozzi. We do AI with providers. So we, for example, when they do rounds, we take the case using AI and see that they can interact with what they just said in a structured way, and that makes them think about what they can do with this. Oh, I understand that I can actually use it. Wait a minute, I have an idea for a project. And then, the scientist in all of this has to be the one that grounds the research in the ethics. Because to be honest with you, if you do a PhD at some point, some kind of bioethics, is part of your training. So it's a moral duty to make sure that these people are talking together and make sure that they are doing something with some kind of conscience.
There is another question.
Thank you very much. This was very helpful and enlightening. I would have four questions, just if you would comment on them. Very short one. Number one, because we're also grappling exactly with the AI issue in our institution. Number one, do you have a general informed consent? Because I mean, the informed consent of patients may be at different levels as they enter medical healthcare institutions, number one. Second, in the US as well as in Europe, most of the data repositories are not bags of information. They're usually bags how to bill a patient. So how can you access from an AI perspective the data vault from a clinical setting? Number three, how do you access how clinical medicine is really practiced? Because this is not entirely captured in what is reflected essentially how a patient is built, and this is usually the data forms. And how are you able to address the dream to link clinical medicine to all the research data that come from the PhD thesis and all the tail that is usually hidden in laboratories? How can and clinical outcomes? It's too much of too many questions, but can you just react to it? Because that's quite a complex issue, and it would be a dream if this would come true.
Okay. So In the US was easier, I can tell you that, because my patients were come to clinics and automatically I was doing real-time data listening. Everything was on my fingertips. I mean, we worked 1 year in 22 to make it possible, but it was possible thanks to Cerner in my case and Microsoft that were giving some IT help, and that's that was easier. In some system instead, you have a lot of technical, I would say, fragmentation. You have very high resolution data for clinical trials, and then you have nothing for the patient, and then you have again a lot of data. So the way we compensate with that for clinical trial in the US was that we were able to do a patient mapping journeys. And because, people think like, I have a table, patient, variable. It's not like that, actually. You have multiple measures for multiple time points, and those measures can be classified. So if I have a patient that entering clinical trial, mean that from that date moving forward, we'll have more data. And that is a snapshot of that patient, that specific time frame. But because of that, his outcome is going to change, because the patient that engage in clinical trial will be a patient that you can call back in for another clinical trial. And so you will still have more data for some specific population. Rare disease is an example. So at the end of the day, it's about try to don't think about data structure and something that doesn't change over time, but data is dynamic. And as soon as you do due diligence in the way how you collect the data, you process the data, I like Datadog for doing that because I can put a lot of different sources together. You can actually identify super nice metrics that you didn't think that you had before. An example that I do often, we don't have the time for the data, but we were able to identify that not wearing a sensor in type 1 diabetes was a metric for getting worse. And we were able to target that by specific programs sponsored by pharmaceutical company because we had that data. The data scientists actually in the beginning, they were removing the data because they were an outliner. So if the patient doesn't have a sensor, it's an outliner. I'm going to remove the patient. But then actually when we went to clinic and we understand why the patient removed, so what the behavior behind the data, that was something that we can target clinically. And then we improved the life for those children by providing them access. These were children with Medicare, and they were not able to buy the sensors. So we will make a program for supporting that. And so we wrote the grant, we got the funding in, we got the patient on the sensor. That went better for 2 years. You know what I mean? So it's really think about dynamic data that might change over time, and make sure that you build control system in the data infrastructure, so you have somebody that knows epidemiology, knows statistics, that can help you understand if this variation is statistically significant, and a clinician that can help you understand why it's significant.
We're sorry we don't have time for other questions. We move on the next speaker, that is Yassam Youssefi, a PhD candidate in Law, Science and Technology from the University of Bologna and affiliated to the University of Luxembourg. The title of her presentation is The Quest to AI Fairness, Ethical, Legal and Technical Solutions. The floor is yours. Thank you. The last one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your patience and for still hanging around. I know you must all be tired. It's the second day, but just a few more minutes. I promise not to steal away so much of your time, also because I have a legal background, so I don't know what I'm doing here. Just joking. But I do hope to share my insights on AI, bioethics, and law today. Which is not actually my area of expertise again, because I did my thesis, my PhD dissertation on fairness in AI from ethical, legal, and technical standpoints. So this is not really what this is not my forte, but let's see. So I want to start with the definition of AI in the AI Act, so that you understand where I stand is probably different than many other perspectives, because I look at it legally. So in Article 3, the AI Act says AI systems means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment. And for explicit or implicit objectives, it infers from the input that it receives how to generate outputs, such as predictions, recommendations, content, or decisions. So with this definition, I think we can exclude artificial general intelligence. even though we do have mentions of general purpose AI, that's not the same thing. So we are focused on narrow AI in law because it is the reality. That's what we are trying to regulate in Europe. So with that introduction, as you may know, there are a lot of benefits and a lot of risks to employing AI systems in specifically critical areas such as that of healthcare. These benefits could include, for example, improved diagnosis, personalized treatments, the possibility of having more efficient and quicker diagnosis and earlier detection of some diseases in some cases, even reduced costs and bureaucracy, and telemedicine, so maybe increasing accessibility for underdeveloped areas. And also, of course, more data-driven and precise and accurate decisions. But at the same time, it of course poses a lot of risks. For example, the issue that I talked about in my dissertation was bias in algorithmic decision makings. And as a result of bias, of course, discriminatory outcomes. A lot of issues with data privacy and breaches of security that are, of course, potentially also putting in risk data subjects. The issue of black box medicine and how we do not know in certain instances how a decision was made. Even the designers of those systems could not explain it in some instances. And of course, possible misdiagnosis that could lead to health risks for subjects. And well, on top of that, we have a lot of regulatory challenges because it's hard to define AI, it's hard to kind of regulated because we don't know what the next step will be. For example, with the AI Act, we tried to regulate it, but then LLMs came. So it's constantly evolving, and we are always lagging behind because we don't know how to regulate what isn't there yet. And maybe we shouldn't. That's something to think about. And of course, a lot of issues of transparency and accountability. And from those risks, of course, emerge a big list of ethical issues, amongst which I think in healthcare AI, these are the most important ones. The first thing being the relationship, the human-patient relationship that constitutes the essential element of every diagnosis. And of course, in healthcare therapies, kind of gives autonomy to the patient because they know that they can talk to the doctor. But in AI cases, that may be nudged away, which could be an ethical issue. And of course, we have the questions of reliability of AI because of the opacity that certain algorithms could have. So can we rely on them? Can we trust them? And if we do trust them and if they turn out problematic, who can we hold liable and who can we hold accountable? The doctor, the developer of the AI system, the patient for trusting it? Of course not. And of course, all of this depends on the availability of the data, the accuracy and quality, and as Florida puts it, the provenance as well of the data. Another, of course, main issue that was mentioned also a bunch of times in this conference is consent and autonomy, and how to make sure that informed consent is obtained. Also, for example, I'm working on a European project with people with dementia. How can you ensure that informed consent is maintained in the 3 years project that we're holding with our data subjects? That's kind of tricky. So there is a huge scholarly focus now on bias in AI systems, and healthcare is not an exception. Since the early days of clinical trials, women and minority groups have been underrepresented as study participants. So we have an underrepresentation of women in the data and an overrepresentation and dominance of men in the data. And of course, those men are Caucasian because other study shows racial bias. And that's always relevant for healthcare AI. I recently did a chapter in the Handbook of Artificial Intelligence and International Relations on ethical dilemmas and regulatory landscape in healthcare artificial intelligence that you could look into if this talk is interesting at all for you. But I'm going to try to take you through what I said in that chapter. So first of all, let's look at the causes of, I'm going to move, yeah. First, let's look at the causes of healthcare AI discrimination. First and foremost is the way we collect data and the practices that we have in doing so. So of course, there are a lot of historical inequalities. We know that in healthcare normally. And a lot of systematic exclusions, because usually participants of studies have been historically male and white male. And there is, of course, a lot of disparities when it comes to healthcare, even without AI involved. And training data represents the historical inequalities that we have in a society. So this is called the principle of garbage in, garbage out. So what you feed the system, it kind of gives back to you, exactly mirroring the society as is. And of course, like the algorithm design, it doesn't help either, because if we need to, for example, prioritize accuracy, then we cannot sometimes factor for fairness as well. So fairness will be neglected. Or if we select certain features, for example, let's say zip codes for socioeconomic status, we'll end up doing what's called redlining and using those features as proxies for further discrimination. And of course, AI design, algorithmic design in general, could potentially have a mismatch with the real world, because usually these algorithms are designed in a closed environment and they don't really grasp the full truth and variability of healthcare delivery. And we assume that every case should be treated similarly, when that's not true. As we know, for example, women could have different heart issues than men, and we are usually treated with exactly the same approach of men. And this is not the only case. For example, in the case of skin cancer, black people could experience different sorts of symptoms than white people, but image recognition systems usually do the same procedures of scanning as for white skins. And there's of course something called the feedback loop, that is when AI predictions perpetuate disparities by influencing resource allocation, for example, by directing more funding to already well-resourced populations, let's say. So the data sees that this hospital has received, for example, more funding, and as a system that learns on data, it replicates the same thing. So feeding back to the system, we have more and more of the same issue. But let's keep in mind that humans discriminate. We and our decisions could be just as biased, if not more, than AI systems. We are subject to prejudice and to biases that are then passed on to modern technologies through data. And of course, machines learn from us, and that learning is not an autonomy in a moral way or in a conscious way. It's a statistical issue, so it's not moral discrimination as in the case of humans. So let's not blame it all on the machines. That's what I'm saying. And there could even be a silver lining here, that is correcting human bias with AI systems. Of course, there is a challenge to create trustworthy AI systems, but it could be possible that we could correct bias statistically, but I could never open a person's head and like modify some wires here and there and be like, oh, now you're not biased anymore. But I could do that potentially with explainable AI models. And we have to also consider that when we refer to bias, we don't necessarily mean always wrongful discrimination. Bias is also necessary in some cases, especially in healthcare. So we have to, I think, differentiate between what's morally wrongful, what's considered a legal discrimination, and what's considered harmful but not morally wrongful. So there are a lot of categories here and there that I also explore a bit in my thesis. We could have a conversation about that later, but I could not get into so much. So I'll just focus on the legal part, what we consider to be legally harmful or legally wrongful. So discrimination in law, in EU law, could be direct, indirect, or intersectional. Direct discrimination is when we treat someone unfairly based on a characteristic that they have, and that characteristic is protected by the law. For example, I go and do an interview, and the person looks at me, and they're like, "Oh, you're Iranian. We just don't hire Iranians." That's direct discrimination. It has happened. Indirect discrimination is when seemingly neutral policies and practices in place disproportionately disadvantage a particular group. For example, let's say a job ad coming out and saying minimum height should be 180 centimeters. That's discriminating against women. Maybe this is not a requirement that that job actually needs, but it's an indirect discrimination towards women. And then we have what we call intersectional discrimination that I think is the most relevant when it comes to healthcare disparities. That's experimenting a compounded kind of discrimination that's usually based on more than one and multiple overlapping protected characteristics. For example, a woman of color that is also a Muslim, if she's discriminated based on all of these three characteristics that are protected, that's a different kind of discrimination than what a normal black woman would experience. Or than a normal black person would experience, even in that case, because the factor of woman here adds on. When it comes to algorithms, we have new categories of discrimination, something that is called also affinity groups or data groups, that they may be discriminated as well. For example, groups of sad teenagers. Seriously, they are discriminated, or dog owners, cat owners. That could happen, and it has happened in the UK, for example, with house ads, where people with dogs did not receive certain ads. And what can you even do about that? So you know that you can statistically see that discrimination has happened, but there is no law protecting you. And in this case, we saw the issue, but in many cases we don't even see the issue. So sad teenagers, for example, let's say, if they're not given certain opportunities, or if they're nudged through certain directions, for example, let's say use of drugs, there is a lot of issues, unfortunately, there. Like if they keep receiving advertisements for electronic cigarettes, which they do, because the feed that they have on their Instagram is sadder than most. And of course, the algorithm realizes that it's a sad teenager, and sad teenagers usually do buy electronic cigarettes. So in the end, you are harming a group of people, but there is no law protecting them. Okay, moving on. Let's look at bioethics and law. So what we know of bioethics so far is I think that in biotechnology and in genetic engineering, there are certain regulations, very strict ones, especially in Europe. So EU law regulates genetically modified organisms, both in agriculture and in medicine. We know that they do it to ensure safety of humans and environment. With genome editing, we know that we are subject to very strict regulations as well. Same goes for assisted reproductive technologies. Different regulations in each member state. They have margin of appreciation for how they want to implement the law. And of course, end-of-life decisions is almost a no-no in Europe, but then in some cases, in severe difficulties, it's accepted in some countries, for example, Belgium. But this is not the extent of bioethics that I think is relevant when it comes to AI. What we should be focusing on is the 5 principles of Beauchamp and Childress. Autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, which were taken in an initiative called AI for Hope for People by Floridi and others. And they were expanded to fit into the principles of ethical AI. So Floridi grabbed these principles and kind of used them in order to leverage the good of AI while also preventing the harm of it, and added onto them the principle of explicability, that is transparency and understanding of AI systems. Because of course, without that, we couldn't really address this new ethical challenge. But the basis was bioethical principles. And then, of course, Europe likes to regulate everything, but thank goodness, because otherwise I wouldn't have had a job. But we started a long journey of, from 2018, of European Commission coming up with a coordinated AI plan, to nominating the high-level expert group on AI, where 7 ethical AI principles came out that were, again, founded on those bioethical principles by Florida. And then in 2020, we had a white paper on AI by the European Commission, which was completely useless. And I did a thesis on that, so I know. And then the European Commission came up with the proposal for the AI Act to regulate, to lay down, for a regulation laying down harmonized rules on AI. And then recently it came out, and before that there was also a proposal for an AI liability directive, which is not very important here. But recently the AI Act did come out, and it's very interesting. It's a harm-based regulation. We have from minimal risk to unacceptable risk. Unacceptable risk are AI systems that actually are prohibited in Europe. But it's a good thing, because those are the systems that do either, for example, manipulation or biometric remote recognition, social scoring, which are things you don't want in Europe, I think. We're not ready yet. Maybe in China, but that's happening already. But the thing is, we have high-risk systems that could come to European market, and all they need to do is to go through certain requirements. For example, some compliance measures that aren't there for limited risk and minimal risk systems, like the fundamental rights impact assessment that they have to go through. Or in some cases, for example, if there are medical devices, they have to go through medical device regulation to comply with that. And then they have to comply with the fundamental rights aspect of the AI Act. There is, of course, also general purpose AI systems. That's a new kind of risk. It's a systemic risk. Those are systems that are capable of doing a lot of things, a lot of tasks, and their level of capability could lead to a different kind of risk, that is the systemic risk, and they have to do other kinds of legal stuff to comply. So you know about the MDR and about the in vitro medical device regulation. I'm not going to go through that, but the whole point of it is that I think in all of these regulations that we have, together with the GDPR, we are kind of getting an example from bioethics. So focusing on transparency, explainability, accountability, informed consent, autonomy, privacy, these are things that we see in all of the regulations I just said. On risk prevention and mitigation, and on access and equity, in unfortunately very limited cases, we are kind of promoting bioethics and bioethical principles, but that's not enough. I think there are,
yes, the time is
it's the last slide.
The last, okay.
Yeah. So I think, of course, there is unfortunately not enough technical solutions to address this issue, and what's out there is not enough. There is still this factor of trustworthiness that is very difficult for us as humans to trust AI, especially in such critical sectors. The fact that there is a lot of disparities amongst member states in how they implement laws. For example, Italy just randomly wants to wants to ban ChatGPT. That's not what we want. And there is, of course, also legal uncertainty because there is a lot of regulation ping-ponging, and sometimes you have to comply with one and a million others in order to comply fully. But all of that said, of course, we have to think of the global competition and where we stand at the world, because going this way, it's difficult to balance innovation with all of these strict principles, ethical and legal principles that we have, and still be at the forefront of AI as we want to be. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Yaseman, for your clear and very detailed presentation. We don't have time to react. So we can move to the next and last panel, the sixth panel about artificial intelligence and artificial life.